Happy evening and a warm welcome from India to Lord Jeffrey Archer. And good afternoon as it's your noon time. A warm welcome to Sri Yaduvir Krishnadatta Chamaraja Vadiyar, titular head of Vadiyars, the royal family of Mysore. Aroon Raman, and to all our viewers on Facebook and YouTube. Trustees, Mysuru Book Club members, a warm welcome to the members of Rotary Ivory City, Mysuru, who are watching this program live at their meeting with a big screen on. I'm Shubha Sanjayars, the chairperson and the director of Mysuru Literature Festival, 5th edition and second virtual one. Over to you, Yaduvir Vadiyar.
Thank you, Shubha. It's a pleasure to be joining you all today at this event of the Mysuru Literature Festival, which is the 5th edition and the second virtual series. Very happy to know that the Literature Festival has continued despite the trying times that have been the pandemic over the last few years, albeit virtually. As we all know, Mysore throughout its history has seen many vicissitudes coming from, be it geopolitical shifts, shifts in administration, many such other things. But one thing that has always remained constant is the fact that it has been a cultural hub. I'm very glad that the Mysuru Literature Festival is continuing this trend, this ethos of Mysore in being a cultural center and continuing to promote literature, the arts, and continuing to promote many such other discussions relating to relevant topics around our culture going forward. It's truly an honor to be sharing this, being live on this event with Mr. Jeffrey Archer, whose storied career and many works and achievements I need not elaborate, I'm sure everyone knows on. It's truly an honor to be here with him, as well as, of course, Mr. Aroon Raman. A pleasure to be with you as well, sir.
Thank you.
I extend once again my heartiest wishes and many congratulations to the Mysuru Literature Festival on behalf of the Palace at Mysore for their continued success and all of the achievements they've already achieved. Over to you, Mr. Jeffrey Archer and Aroon.
So thank you very much, Jeffrey, for joining us today virtually. We welcome you to the city of Mysore, which is also the home of someone I think who's close to your heart, the writer R.K. Narayan.
Oh, a giant. A giant.
Yeah.
He should have won the Nobel Prize. A giant.
Well, I mean, I think we are proud of him as a resident of Mysore.
Can we leave the screen to you both?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
A warm welcome again, Jeffrey, and to all our viewers. And thank you, Yaduvir, for all those nice words.
I may put the blinds down.
My pleasure.
I've got the sun coming in. I may put the blinds down. Give me 10 seconds. And you tell me if it's better.
Yes, I think that's fine, Jeffrey. You can leave it at that.
Right.
Yes, that's fine.
Right.
That's good. So I'm going to, without much further ado,
yes,
get right into my first question. Obviously, the statistics about you, the data, the number of books sold, 100 countries, close to 300 million copies, one of the most prolific authors in the thriller genre, written short stories across the sort of formats. You've been very, very successful. And when I was looking back at your life's sort of bio data, if one could call it that, or account of your life, things seem to have really gotten you into storytelling and writing. In that sense, in 1974, when you were in a bit of a financial hole and you decided you'd write your first book, not a penny more, not a penny less, in an effort to sort of get yourself out of those straitened and difficult circumstances. So the first question I have for you is, of course, you've not looked back since. It's been a phenomenal ride. You've been a politician, you've been a philanthropist, you've been supporting charities, you've been an art collector, you've been a senior Tory politician. So you've been all over the place, apart from being an extremely successful writer. So my first question to you is, what makes Jeffrey Archer Jeffrey Archer? And was it an epiphanic moment in 1974 when you sat down, put your pen to paper and got started? How did it all happen, and what makes you the kind of man and writer that you are?
It did start after I left the House of Commons in debt, a heavy debt, and wrote my first book, as you rightly pointed out, the Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. But it was fairly foolish of me to imagine that if you're in debt, the way to get out of it is to write a book. Because here I am in my old age, very well aware that that's about the last thing you should be doing if you're in debt.
Right.
And indeed, my first book was turned down by 16 publishers. The 17th publisher kindly published it, and they just about sold 3,000 copies. And they gave me £3,000, which wasn't enough. And my wife said, perhaps it's time for you to get a real job. But then the breakthrough came with Cain and Abel. That book came out 3 years later, and indeed changed my whole life overnight. It sold 1 million copies worldwide in the first week. It's now sold 37 million copies. And the Times of India told me that 50 million Indians had read Cain and Abel. Wow, I say to that, and thank you very much indeed, India.
Fantastic. But did it just happen because of financial pressures, or was the story always there within you, sort of bubbling out, and one day you would have done it irrespective?
No, I think I didn't have a clue. I wanted to be a member of parliament. I wanted to serve in political life. And when I couldn't get a job, it was the last resort to sit down writing. It makes me wonder if Proust is right, Aaron, when he says, we all end up doing the thing we're second best at. Because that changed my whole life. I began a new career as a writer. And by the way, I don't think I am a writer. I think I'm a storyteller.
Right.
And by the way, the man you mentioned at the very beginning, Aroon Raman, he's a storyteller, damn good writer, but much more important, he had a God-given gift to tell a story. I think Malguldi Days is one of the great books of all time.
Right.
And I treasure it, absolutely treasure it. So I think I am a storyteller, not a writer.
And that's how I think you've approached the first book onwards, which is to spin a story in a way that's holding the audience. Which leads me to my next question, really. Jeffrey, you've had a very long innings as a storyteller and as a writer, right? It's been a huge output. All of them have done well, right? So when you look back, obviously Cain and Abel sort of hit the stratosphere. Several other books have probably done extremely well, some others not so well. So you've had a sort of, let's say, a sort of curve of books that have some which have done outstandingly, some less so. So if you look back and I ask you, what is it that makes for a bestseller? Is it plot? Is it pace? Is it characterization? Is it backdrop? What's the secret sauce? What makes you so successful as an author?
I think character is important. I think I discovered very early on that they actually liked Cain and liked Abel as two human beings. And clearly with the Clifton Chronicles, with Harry Clifton and Emma and Giles, they became part of their lives because the books just went on selling and selling. And I'm hoping in the William Warwick series that I've kind of halfway through, that William Warwick as a character will be as successful as Harry Clifton. And you're right, of course. You should think carefully why something sells, but the honest answer to your question is the public will let you know. It's no use intellectuals having a long discussion on why someone is a storyteller, another person is a writer, why they say, you and I between us, Aaron, we haven't got a clue. the public decide. And you soon discover, because the numbers tell you, oh, they loved Harry Clifton. Oh, they loved William Warwick. And that's how you find out.
Well, I think Conan Doyle, I mean, very famously is supposed to have remarked when someone asked him, you know, who do you write your Sherlock Holmes stories for? And he said, for the man who's half a boy and the boy who's half a man.
Brilliant reply.
And I think that's a brilliant, brilliant sort of explanation for something like that.
Yes.
In your own case, I mean, and often thriller writers say, well, if we ask them, what's your holy grail as a thriller writer? And they say, well, the book should be unputdownable.
Yes.
It should literally hook the reader and make them turn the page and sort of hardly ever stop till they've finished it. So in your own books, and I think that obviously has happened in a very big way and has contributed a lot to the kind of success that you've enjoyed as a writer. Characterization, as you say, you know, people empathize with the character. They want to know more about them. They want to identify with the character. But I think, wouldn't you say that the role of plot, the sort of grip that it sort of exercises on the reader, is very critical? And how do you actually go about structuring something that's so gripping?
Well, in my own case, I don't know how I do it. I wish I did, because it's a question I'm asked every day of my life. I get up in the morning, I pick up my pen, it goes onto the paper and it moves. I haven't got a clue where it's going. But I think that's because I'm a storyteller. I wish I could, as some authors do, put little yellow slips on the wall and follow them. I tried everything, but the truth is that I never know more than 2 or 3 pages ahead. And I pray that the 4th page will be there. And when that stops, I will stop.
Right. That's very interesting that you should say that. I mean, it's almost as if the story is pulling you along and your pen travels across the page as the story moves you and as thoughts and ideas come to you, I think. It's a very interesting way of describing the process of writing as you follow it. That's wonderful to hear. But what about, you've had a fairly tumultuous and fairly exciting and a very, very different and varied life, Jeffrey. You must have come across characters from real life across the spectrum, the poor, the rich, all sorts and all types. Have any of them been influential in the way in which your books have turned out, incidents that have packed your pages, characters that have come to life in your works? Are there many such examples, incidents that you can sort of, when you go back and reflect on things?
Oh, yes, I think it's been a great privilege to have met so many interesting people in my life, and to have worked with someone like Margaret Thatcher for 11 years was a great privilege, and to be married to a remarkable woman who is currently chairman of the Science Museum, after running a hospital in this country as chairman when the Queen made her a Dame. So I've had strong people around me, but to take your point further, I've written 92 short stories in my lifetime, 6 sets of short stories. And I would think of the 92, I suspect that 50 to 60 of them are people telling me stories, are incidents I have witnessed. And yes, you're quite right. That has been a privilege. But as an author, I'm continually looking for that. And actually, during COVID lockdown in Great Britain, that was one of the things I most missed, was the interplay with other people. Because they can sometimes in a sentence deliver a piece of magic, while another person might talk for 3 hours and you get absolutely nothing. And that I miss. I miss both, because that's part of my job, is as an observer and observing things. And people say to me, I can tell you a story, Jeffrey. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. But sometimes they give you a germ of an idea which can go in another direction.
Right. And do you find that the last 2 years with the COVID pandemic and things happening, as you just mentioned, has it in some way become a bit of a challenge, do you think, for a writer like you, a thriller writer, not being able to move out as much, as being able to interact as much? Has it been a you find the walls have closed in a little bit? How would you feel about it?
Well, I'm bound to say a writer is very privileged during COVID. I have a friend who owns a restaurant who's nearly gone bankrupt. I have a friend who runs an art gallery and it's been closed for 14 months, but you can't stop me picking up the pen and writing. So in the last 16 months, I've written 2 books, which would normally have taken 2 years. I'm very glad to be out of lockdown. I'm very glad to be going to the theatre again twice a week. I'm very glad to be conducting my charity auctions, which is my big hobby in life. And I'm very glad to be meeting lots of people. I've missed all of that, but I can't complain compared with what some people have been through.
Absolutely. The real sort of challenges of people who've run shops, who've been running businesses, I think has been very, very, very serious indeed. Which brings me to this question, Jeffrey, that some of your output has in fact been based on difficult periods in your life. The prison diaries, for example, Cat o' Nine Tails, when you were actually in prison for a while. Was that, I mean, what would you say to psychological pressure, confinement, issues of that nature, which tend to sort of oppress a mind or a person? How can that lead to creative, let's say, outbursts or efflorescences of the kind that you experienced when you were inside? Is there a kind of are they positively related in some sense? Because we hear of other writers also who've been incarcerated and have actually come out with great work, and yet others who sort of seem to fall apart. What has been the relationship between stressful and stressed times and creative output?
I didn't feel a great deal of stress, but I did meet a lot of interesting people who had stories to tell, which I quite happily took advantage of.
Okay, so that's been, you'd say your productivity didn't really drop, notwithstanding other circumstances, right? Which I think is really quite remarkable. So what would you when it comes to the craft of writing, right? Because your output has been so prodigious, so large. Typically, what is your writing day like? How long do you take to finish a typical novel? If you take Canaan, which is really an outstanding, which really launched you as a writer, and a successful one at that. How long did that take to write? How long do you write now? Typically, how quickly are you able to churn out a novel? What's your writing style and writing day like? How does it work?
Well, I certainly don't churn out a novel. If I had to churn out a novel, I would stop writing. I rise at 5 o'clock in the morning. I start work around 6. I do 2 hours from 6 to 8. I take a 2-hour break. I do 2 hours from 10 till 12. I take another 2-hour break. I do 2 hours between 2 and 4. I take a further 2-hour break. And I do the final session of the day between 6 and 8. I'll be in bed by 9:30, 10, up again at 5:30 the next morning. To answer your question, the first draft would take me 35 days, about 300 hours. I then take a month off and go back to what in real terms is the 4th draft, because I've already written it out 3 times, and go through the entire process again. No one reads it other than my 2 senior researchers until about the 5th draft. It doesn't get to my publisher and editor until about the 14th draft, and it doesn't get in the bookshop until about the 16th draft. I wish there was a shorter cut, Aroon, but there isn't. And in answer to the second part of your question, I think I was a storyteller from book 1, from Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. I think after 40 years, I'm a better craftsman. I'm sure that's an experience you've had, that where I'm better at it now, because I've done 27 novels. And so I know what's coming round the bend. It isn't a shock and a surprise what I will have to go through, what I will have to put myself through. That's no longer a shock and surprise. But in answer to your word that I've heard many times from many people, and you were quite right to raise it, the word tyranny, it's never a tyranny for me. I love it from the moment I get up to the moment I go to bed. I'm very, very lucky. It's never been a tyranny. If I ever felt it was a tyranny, I would stop.
It's very interesting that you should say that, because you've also, if you even the last 20 years, 25 years, you've had a full life as a politician, for example. You've been involved in a number of causes. So when we talk about the tyranny of, let's say, time and responsibility, writing is also, is a very concentrated mental activity. On the other hand, so have been a lot of your other, phases of your career. As a full-time politician, maybe as a full-time fundraiser for the Tories, you've donned many hats. So hasn't that meant that your ability to take time off and just sit and write at home, have there been huge challenges? And I'm asking this because many people who come to me say, you know what, we're so occupied, we've got hundreds of things going on. How can I switch on? How can I switch off? How can I really do creative stuff when 1,000 things are crowding in on me? We've taken on a lot. Do we quit our jobs? And I always say, guys, don't quit, because that's not the way you necessarily make a living immediately from writing. It's hard to make a living that way. So in your from your vantage viewpoint, what would you say to this whole business of managing, juggling time, juggling multiple responsibilities and wearing many hats? How does one give time?
It's very difficult if you are, to quote you, and you're quite right, have to earn an income or a living at the same time. When you reach my stage, you don't. So my secretary literally picks up my diary and literally puts lines through at least 180 days in the year, when I will go to my home in Mallorca and I will write, and nothing, I repeat, nothing is allowed to interrupt me. So that's the way I do it. Then when I come back, I do my charity work. When I come back, I go to the theater a lot. I meet a lot of people. I'm involved in politics in the sense that I'm fascinated by it. Even though I'm 81, I still have friends in politics. And in Britain today, even as we're speaking, the budget is taking place. So my love of politics is still there. But I would say to young writers, and I'd say this very seriously indeed, it is an excuse to say, I've got too much to do. If you've got too much to do, you don't really want to write a novel. You're looking for an excuse. Clear the desk, get out for, and it may be a month. And indeed, there may be those among you who ring up and say, Jeffrey, I can't get out for a month. I've got a wife and family. I've got a job. And I appreciate that 100%. But if you want to see your work published, it can't be the third or fourth thing you're doing. You don't say to a ballet dancer, stop dancing for 3/4 of the day and do something else. You don't say to someone playing the violin, you'll have to stop for most of the day. You don't say to a painter, don't pick up the paintbrush. Why should writing be any different? It's tough, it's hard, it's demanding, and most of all it demands concentration. And if you can't do all those things, don't bother. Because if you're going to take me on, or the rest of the world on, we don't need your second best effort. We need the best you can possibly do, because the best is the only way you can hope to achieve people wanting to read you.
I think, you probably made a very, very important point there, Jeffrey, because the world of publishing seems ever more competitive. The number of people who want to write is growing exponentially.
Yes.
It's growing. Everybody wants to have their sort of book out there published. And I think the publishers are swamped. There are just not even enough editors to look at manuscripts.
Quite right.
And it's a complete challenge. And I think people are intimidated by the huge challenges that they have, and they have starry eyes to start with, but they come into a really challenging situation. What advice do you have for the aspiring writer? I mean, what can you?
Well, but to start with, having heard that remarkably erudite speech of yours, to start with, if I wanted to play cricket for India, I wanted to be a batsman, a bowler, or a wicketkeeper, it wouldn't be any different. I don't know if you've noticed, Aaron, but there's only 11 people in a cricket team.
Correct.
We can't put 3 or 4 million on the pitch who want to play for India. They'd all love to. Why should it be different for writing? There's probably only 11 places for the top writers in the world, in your country.
Correct.
And why would it be different? I'd love to open the batting for England. I'm just not good enough. And that's, you've got to face the real truth. This is as you said, as you rightly said, it's probably more competitive now than it's ever been. In my day, they used to give you the chance to write 3 books before you had the breakthrough. Nowadays, if you don't do it on the first book, the publisher drops you. So you're quite right. It's never been as tough as this. But Aaron, listen, I'd like to play cricket for India, but I'm not good enough. There's only 11 men on the pitch, and I'm not one of them.
So what you're saying is, go out there, give it your best shot, but be aware that it's not easy.
Yes.
And I think that sort of sets your,
Yes.
makes you a little more resilient.
But don't let it stop you. Don't let it stop you trying. There'll be one of you out there whose magic and the world is waiting for you.
I think that's absolutely, probably the most important thing that I think one could say as a writer like you can say to someone who really wants to enter the arena. And I think that's I'm sure that a lot of people are listening in to what you're really saying here, because so many people are intimidated by what's happening, but the idea is not to give up, but to hang in there.
Correct.
So, which also, Jeffrey, while real life, I think, has had its sort of, it's brought up its own stories, its incidents of importance and so on, characters that you think, were interesting enough that they've sparked ideas in your writing. What about, how do I say, other writers? Could be non-fiction, could be fiction. Who are those writers by whom you've been influenced over the last few decades, whether in the thriller genre or in the non-fiction or in some other sort of field of writing?
Well, my favorite author is a man called Stefan Zweig, who was an Austrian who left Austria when Hitler came into power in Germany. He was Jewish. He fled to New York. He only wrote 2 novels and a lot of non-fiction about the problems in Europe at the time, and he was the #1 writer in the world. He then came out of favor, and recently they've been publishing him again, and the world has discovered that Beware of Pity is a masterpiece, and that he is one of the greatest storytellers that's ever lived. And when I say influenced by him, I've been influenced to realize how much more I've got to do when you read someone who's as brilliant as that. On the short story front, I've said already that R.K. is, one of the greats of all time. I put him there with Maupassant, with Somerset Maugham, with O. Henry, with H.H. Munro. I think he's truly one of the greats. So those 5 I name as having influenced me on the short story front, though certainly Stefan Zweig would be the man I would most admire when it comes to writing. I can tell you a lot of novels I've loved and a lot of novelists I admire, but I have to say that Stefan Zweig comes #1.
And when you write, as you are doing now, do you keep reading on the side? Do you read? You continue to read, and is it omnivorous reading? You read all kinds of things, or do you shut yourself off from reading when you write?
And the first draft, yes. When I go away to Mallorca to write the first draft for 30 days, my brain is only on one thing. When I'm walking, when I'm eating, probably when I'm sleeping. But once I'm through the getting the first draft on paper, the outline out there, I will read a novel if it's been highly recommended. I will read a novel that someone has someone has said, this is a bit special, Jeffrey, you ought to read it. So as I'm on at the moment on the new book, I'm on about the 12th draft. I am, yes, you're quite right. I'm reading a lot at the moment. I have several books on my bedside table and indeed on my study table, and I am going through them. Because of my age, and I will remind you that I'm 81, because of my age, if I'm not there after 3 chapters, I move on.
Right.
So I can get through 3 books in a day, and then I can be tied down, completely tied down when someone grips me. And I pray for that. And I listen carefully to anyone who says, you ought to read X, Jeffrey, you ought to read Y, Jeffrey, because that's one of the many ways you can read the crits. You can go and see your favorite bookshop. And I guess you'll have a friend in your favorite bookshop who advises you. I have several in several bookshops. But that rare book that breaks the mold, that rare book that has you unable to put it down. Oh, please tell me if you found one.
Right. It's the Holy Grail. So,
Yes.
Jeffrey, you're also one of those writers and authors who've been made into television series, who've been adapted to screen and so on. What's been the experience of that? I mean, it's a very different medium. The way in which your book translates onto the screen, there is a translation effect. Could be a translation loss, could be a translation shift. And it's often the case I've known where authors say, hey, this is not at all what I've written. They've done something completely different with the TV series or with the film. What's been your experience with working in translating your books to film and the way in which that process has gone? And how much control do you exercise over it as an author?
Well, take your first point straight away. Whenever I go to India, and I'm told quite often in England by Indians, that Bollywood has already made Cain and Abel with a different name and with hardly a change in the story. So frankly, Bollywood, which is at its best highly professional and a genuine rival to Hollywood, at its worst, they're a bunch of thieves. And they should be taken out and shot one by one. Because I've seen some Bollywood films I love, but I get pretty fed up with friends in India saying, oh, well, Jeffrey, they stole that one and they stole that one. Absolutely nothing I can do about it. Also, there's nothing I can do about pirating. I came into Mumbai quite recently, and a charming little boy came up to me with a pile of books, and he tapped on my window. And he said, would you like the latest Jeffrey Archer? And I said, I am the latest Jeffrey Archer. So not only are my books being stolen for Bollywood films, they're being stolen. And the way the Indians are the most, without exception, the most entrepreneurial race on earth. I love them for that. But they steal my book, or they probably pay for it at London airport. They get on a plane, they take it back to India. It's on the streets in 2 days. So there's no doubt about the enterprise of the Indians or the energy of the Indians. But it's my book you've stolen.
Well, Jeffrey, I must say that in India, for an author to be available in a counterfeit edition on the streets is a singular honor. It shows how popular you must be in the regular edition. So I must, in fact, congratulate you on something that not a lot of authors achieve. So I think that's great. But in the context of the British television series, for example, do you often end up being quite satisfied with the way in which the translation has happened? Or do you feel that you've been shortchanged and they've taken excessive liberties with your book, for example?
I think the BBC did a brilliant job on Cain and Abel many years ago, and I thought their efforts on Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less were not as good. I thought ITV did very well with First Among Equals. It won several prizes, but that was many years ago. Recently, I've had Netflix, Apple, all of them getting in touch, taking what you know only too well, Aaron, options.
Correct.
And they say, you know, this is the greatest book I've ever read. It'll be on the screen in a year's time. My God. And in a year's time, absolutely nothing has happened at all. To be fair, they sent a check to get what they call the option, but nothing has happened. Fools like me spend, well, I don't any longer, spend their time thinking, wow, I'll have another film this time next year. But I've learnt to listen to my son, William, who says, Dad, don't start celebrating until you're eating the popcorn.
It's a good one as any, as a piece of advice. So Jeffrey, I'm going to sort of, in a couple of minutes, going to take a few questions from the audience. But before we do that, let me ask you just a final, perhaps a slightly more serious question. In the context of, even as your long career in British politics, your continuing involvement in a sense, if not that actively, as a very interested, maybe involved bystander in some sense, but as someone who knows the inner workings of British politics, who's got friends and connections there, we've seen in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, the drift in politics has not been very healthy. We've seen, let's say, growing inequalities. We've seen climate change issues. We've seen certainly breakdowns in governance, certain distrust of people, the common man and people in politics of power. There have been issues, of course, with, let's say, the wars in the Middle East. I mean, there's a long list of, let's say, a laundry list of issues that have gone wrong. Certainly, there have been some things that have probably gone right. But what's your overall take, as not so much as a writer, yes, but as a composite sort of a politician, a party man, a writer, a kind of a man who's sort of seeing everything, but who's also a writer and a storyteller? I mean, are we passing through a particularly difficult time in world affairs? Are you optimistic overall, or are you pessimistic? What's your overall take on the state of affairs of the world, if one could use a very big sort of a term there?
Well, I think first and foremost, the very finest of both our nations are not going into politics. They're going into business, they're going into the law, they're going into medicine, they're going into being architects or almost anything except going into politics. And if you don't get the best people going into India Company Limited, you're going to have a big problem. And Britain's the same. We have exactly the same problem. I talk to young people over here and they say, really able young people, I think, wow, you'd make a good politician. Wow, you've got a lot to offer. And they say, no, thank you, Jeffrey. I don't want to be shouted at every day of my life. I don't want to be told I'm an idiot every day of my life. I don't want my private life on the front page of papers. I think I'll just have a good life and work hard. We're losing those people, Aaron, is the truth. We're losing outstanding people in your country and in mine. And if we don't stop spending our lives criticizing the whole time, the amount of unpleasant stuff on Twitter and Facebook, and it's terrible. We've got young girls in this country committing suicide because they're being attacked on Facebook. I mean, the whole thing is just awful. And so when you say is it turning for better, for worse, I think at the moment for worse, but we've got to drag it back. And I do not know the answer to how you do it, but I do feel we need the very best of both our nations to be giving public service.
I think that's an extremely fair point, and I think it's pretty much the case even with the United States at this point of time, or many other democracies, that we're not attracting the best talent into public service and into politics. And I think
well, of course you're right. My heroes, Adams, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, where are they now? And are you telling me in the United States, with a population of nearly 300 women, there isn't a Mrs. Gandhi there to come and do something? I don't believe it. I think the Mrs. Gandhi is there. She doesn't want to join in with the ill-mannered, loutish behavior of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, both at the moment, who act like thugs when they talk about the other side. I hate, detest, and disapprove of people who can only criticize but won't actually give any service themselves. They sit on the sidelines criticizing, or if they get a chance, all they do is criticize the other side. I'm not interested in criticizing the other side. I want to hear what you're going to do for the good of your country. And we didn't get that from either Trump or Biden. And we need to go back to Jefferson. We need to go back to Lincoln. We need to go back to Roosevelt. And we need a Mrs. Gandhi in your country to do the same thing.
Right. Okay, I think that sort of has been an extremely interesting discussion, Jeffrey. I think we've sort of covered a reasonable gamut of things that's around your work and a little bit of your life as well. Let me take a couple of questions from the audience, and one of them has to do with the fact that one of the people from the audience says, Mr. Archer, several of your works have evolved around global historical events or events in history, or have drawn from events in history. How do you develop the research for such works? I mean, particularly if you look earlier on, there wasn't an internet, there wasn't a lot of stuff that was available instantly online. So what role did research play in your work, and how did you actually go about doing it?
Well, in the case of Cain and Abel, I visited Poland and stayed there for some considerable time, looking at the country and reading their history, particularly their history with Russia and the possible escape from the East to get to America. In the case of America, I've had a love affair with America that's been going on for 40 years. One of my closest friends at Oxford and an usher at my wedding was Senator Bill Bradley, later became Senator Bill Bradley. So I've kept those connections up. And where you've really hit the nail on the head is now, of course, you can press a button and you can get a piece of research done in 10 seconds. But I also have, for the William Warwick books, a retired detective chief superintendent from the Metropolitan Police who had to leave the police because he had a mental breakdown, what he described in his own book as one murder too many, a detective chief superintendent, John Sutherland. And I have a lady called Michelle Roycroft, Detective Sergeant Michelle Roycroft, who was 30 years in the Metropolitan Police Force. And she was an expert on drugs. So when I asked them both to be researchers, and what I do after I've done about, say, 5 or 6 drafts, I hand the book, they get the book first. And I say, make sure I haven't made a fool of myself. Make sure I haven't said something that a policeman would never say, would never do, would never dream. Make sure, and when I'm critical, make sure it's fair. And so I've got those two on hand all the time to keep advising me. So I hope the authenticity of any book is credible. And so that's my research. It's reading and people. And it's about 50-50 when you break it down.
Right. And of course, now I would imagine that the Are you personally sort of doing your own research on the net a little bit more, and you're more sort of, you do your own scrolling and looking at Google and doing all that kind of thing, or do you rely on your research assistants to do most of that kind of stuff?
No, I like to do it myself. I think when you do it yourself, you get an insight that they may not see the same thing as you do. Of course, I have people to check I haven't made mistakes. I have one in particular, a researcher, and that's his entire job, is to go from the front of the book to the back and say the Battle of Waterloo was not 1933. So there's always that aspect you have to look at, because it's very simple to make a mistake. I mean, if you look at, I remember when I was a child and we researched, do you remember it? You may be old enough, remember the Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, they and the big encyclopedia in the United States of America, they were the two rivals. And one said the Titanic sank on April the 15th, while another said it sank on April the 16th. Well, a poor researcher like me picks that up and says, make your mind up, when did it sink? So you do rely a lot on other people, and they can be wrong as well.
Correct. Okay, we have another member of our audience, and I'll just sort of bundle these two questions. How has your view on life and writing changed with your age? And do you have a favorite among your books?
I'll take the second first. I'm childish about Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, because it changed my whole life. But the public have let me know in no uncertain terms that Cain and Abel is 100 million people have read the book, so I can't go around pretending that I haven't been influenced by that. Recently, the Clifton Chronicles have given me great happiness, the amount of people who've been kind enough to write to me about that. And again, with William Warwick. I don't think I have a favorite. I do like Paths of Glory, the story of Mallory going to the top of Everest, or did he go to the top of Everest in 1924? I mean, we found his body 700 foot from the top, but we still don't know if he was on the way up or on the way down. That was an interesting challenge. And I love short stories. I love short stories because sometimes you get a vignette, a little incident that happens that's worthy of a dozen pages, but would never make a novel. And my favorite among those is unquestionably Never Stop on the Motorway, which I was given over a phone. The lady rang me to tell me the story. I said, can we meet so I can make notes? And she said, no, I refuse to see you. She didn't want to be seen because what she'd been through, she didn't want to know the person who'd been through it. And it's one of the best short stories, if not the best short story I've ever written. And close to it, I think, is Cheap at Half the Price, that was given to me by one of the leading diamond merchants on earth, Lawrence Graff. So I picked these stories up from remarkable people. Of course, I embellish them. Of course, I put my own slant on them. But the germ is there, and I need the germ, and then off I go. I leaven away once I've got the germ. So I don't think I have a favorite area or a favorite book. But I would say to those fans who claim, and 3,000 people purchased the hardback of Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. And I have had, Aaron, over the years, 10,000 people saying they read it at the time. They can't have done.
So that's good too. It's a wonderful endorsement in a way. And so the first question really was, has your view on life and writing changed with age? I mean, would you?
Well, I'm unquestionably, the honest answer to that question is I remain the storyteller from day one. Yeah. I'm undoubtedly a better craftsman. I'm undoubtedly go into every chapter, every scene, every sentence with 35 to 40 years knowledge. So there's a lot of mistakes I used to make, I don't make. But many people watching this would say, that's the case in my profession, Jeffrey. That's the case when I was a doctor or a lawyer or an architect. 30 years later, I could see that I shouldn't do it that way. That would be a waste of time. So the answer is, I don't think I'm a better storyteller, because I still believe that's a God-given gift. I think I'm a better craftsman.
Okay. there's in fact a very specific question on one of your books, and I think we're coming now to the end of the session. This reader says, I've always wondered why you changed the original structure of First Among Equals from 4 main characters to a later edition that featured only 3. Simon Kerslake, Charles Seymour, and Raymond Gould.
Yeah. Those damned Americans is the answer to that problem. They couldn't handle the Liberal Party. And as you know, I regret it to this day that I did that rewrite. And it's now published in America with 4 characters. In fact, it's published worldwide with 4 characters. And it's only people as old as your questioner, who must be at least 104.
Who must be?
But I congratulate them on spotting it. And I congratulate them on quite rightly bringing me up. It was a mistake. I should have stuck with 4 and told the Americans to get lost.
And so to the last question, Jeffrey, which is, we live in a time of COVID. And as you know, bacteria, germs, biological warfare, all that has been the staple of many thrillers. So has COVID influenced you in a way that we're going to see the pandemic feature in any of your books to come?
No, but I would say, if you're sitting by a television screen now, or you're near one, press the name Bill Gates and look at the lecture he gave 5 years ago at a major university in the United States. He predicted all of this 5 years ago. And I'm bound to say to you, Aaron, I wish I'd heard it 5 years ago, and I wish I'd written a novel saying it's coming, because obviously that would have been the most remarkable, successful novel in history. But I do admire the fact that Mr. Gates, and I commend you all to look it up. It only lasts for 12 minutes, and it's a remarkable 12 minutes because it predicts all that we're going through now. And his amazing research team and the amazing team around him spotted it, and he was the man who told the world. So the answer to your question is, no, I will not be writing about COVID, because I think by the time William Warwick's commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, it'll be about 2015. So I will be able to avoid it with a straight face.
Well, that's great. And it's been a terrific experience to be in discussion with you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for being in on this with us. And with that, I'd like to hand you over back to Shubha.
Well, I'd also like to say thank you, Aaron, because you're one of those old pros who knows what he's doing, which always puts someone like me at ease. So thank you very much for being on parade. And thank you very much for your outstanding questions. And equally, thank you to the Indian people for continuing to keep buying this poor old thing's books and keep being so kind about why you love them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Over to you,
Jeffrey.
Shubha.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Truly a craftsman and very interesting storyteller. In life, no shortcuts. That's a big lesson, and that's a takeaway from this evening. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be with us. And next time you're in India, please do keep Mysuru on your list. And you've had the Mysore royal family person coming and inviting you also. So we would love to have you in Mysore. There's a huge, huge community waiting to meet you in Mysore.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And
very
to our
much.
viewers, thank you for logging in. And on 30th, we have Rajputs and Naga Greens. And on 31st, we have Senani and Krupakar at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thank you.